Hello, everybody. My name is HeroicNerd, and today I have something kind of interesting for you. Today we're going to talk just a little bit about Stan Lee and one of the most interesting pieces of media he had ever written. Of course, I am talking about his first story at Marvel Comics. Now, this is interesting because when most people think of Stan Lee, they think that he is the prime, the paramount, the apex writer for Marvel Comics, but it actually is kind of a bit more interesting than that. Back before Marvel was known as Marvel, it was known as Timely Comics. Stan Lee at the time was age 16, and he got a job, but not writing. He got a job at Timely Comics as an office boy. He would do things like sweep and mop and clean around the office. He would deliver mail and just do odd works for the real employees, the real writers and artists. So he's there and he's spending his time sweeping floors and running errands for the staff. He does this for 3 years. Then, in the year 1941, he finally got a chance to write. He starts writing, but he doesn't write comic books. What does he write? He actually starts out writing prose. Now, for those of you who know, for those of you who are indoctrinated into the golden age of comic books, you know that back then, if you bought a comic book, you would often get a prose story for free, just inserted. They weren't long, and of course, this one as well is not very long, just a few pages, but it was a nice way to increase the value of the book and get people to buy it. So that was Stan Lee's first contribution to Marvel Comics, was writing prose. Now, what was the first story that he ever wrote? Well, this is it right here. I am going to read it in its entirety for you right now. It showed up in an issue of Captain America Comics, and it is titled Captain America Foils the Traitor's Revenge by Stan Lee. I'm sorry, Haynes, but there is no place in this army camp for the likes of you. You have lied, cheated, spied, and stolen. Your conduct is no longer tolerable, and I'm giving you a dishonorable discharge. Now get out. Private Steve Rogers, doing sentry duty nearby, was watching the scene interestedly. He had never seen Colonel Stevens so angry, and Lou Haynes, too, was threateningly mad. The muscular giant took his enormous fist at the colonel. Okay, Colonel, snarled Lou, I'll get out. But let me warn you now, you ain't seen the last of me. I'll get even somehow. Mark my words, you'll pay for this. Haynes walked towards the camp gates, muttering insults under his breath. Suddenly, Haynes felt a strong hand grasp his arm. He looked around into the flashing eyes of Steve Rogers. I wouldn't act like that if I were you, murmured Steve softly. You are insulting a man in the uniform of the United States Army. Here at the camp gates, now beat it. Haynes left, but there was a look of hate in his eyes, which Steve could not help but notice. Later that evening, Steve Rogers was sitting in his tent, playing checkers with his young sidekick Bucky, the camp mascot. Bucky looked disappointed. Gosh, Steve, wailed Bucky. Don't you ever lose a game? I've forgotten what it feels like to win. Steve smiled cheerfully. I'll tell you what, kid. Suppose you borrow a book on how to play checkers and read it. That'll give me a chance to get some shut-eye. You don't know how tired it makes me to beat you all the time. Steve ducked, just in time to dodge the pillow that Bucky threw at him. Why, you little squirt, he grinned. I ought to put you over my knee. Oh yeah, you big palooka. You and what other army? Bucky picked up another pillow and was holding it ready. Suddenly, Steve's smile left his face, and he put his fingers to his lips. Listen, he whispered. Bucky put down the pillow and was silent. He knew that Steve's sensitive hearing must have detected something important. Then Steve spoke. There it is again, Bucky. 3 pairs of footsteps. Outside Colonel Stevens' tent. We'd better look into this. In an instant, Both Steve and Bucky peeled off their outer uniforms, and seconds later they stood revealed as Captain America and Bucky, sentinels of our shores. "Let's go!" cried Captain America. The two troubled hunters stole from their tent and noiselessly trotted to the Colonel Stevens' quarters. Outside his tent were three tough-looking thugs. "Will we all rush him at once?" asked the first. Captain America saw that the man he was talking to was Lou Haines. "Nah," sneered Haines. "You guys stay here and keep chicky. I'll go in and tend to him myself." Then Captain America noticed that Haines was holding a wicked-looking knife in his hand. "Not a second to lose," cried the red, white, and blue Avenger, as he raced towards the three assassins like an avenging hurricane. Lou Haines was the first to see the twin tornadoes rushing at him. "Take care of these two fancy pants," he ordered his men. "I'll attend to the Colonel in a second." Haines' two accomplishments grinned as they watched Captain America rush towards them. They took out their revolvers and prepared to fire. But Captain America suddenly picked up Bucky in his arms and swung him right into the two thugs, knocking their guns out of reach. "All right, Bucky, my lad," he cried. "See how brave they are without their toys." Then he dashed into the tent. Inside the tent, the American Avenger saw Lou Haines about to plunge his knife into the sleeping Colonel's heart. There wasn't time for Captain America to reach Haines before the evil deed could be done. But with the speed of thought, he sent his shield spinning through the air to the other end of the tent, where it smacked the knife out of Haines' hand. Just a side note here, for anybody who knows Captain America's history, they would know that that spinning shield flying through the air is the first instance in ever Marvel Comics history where Captain America uses his shield as a projectile weapon. Anyway, continuing on. Then the mighty crime fighter leaped at Haines and landed a blow at his head. But the traitorous ex-soldier seemed to just shake off the blow, and he grabbed Captain America by the throat with his tremendous fingers. As Haines forced more and more pressure into his grip, Captain America began to get weaker and weaker. His eyes grew dim, and it became difficult for him to breathe. But he managed to summon all of his remaining strength into one last effort, and brought his right fist up under Haines's jaw with enough force to fell an ox. No human being could have stood that blow, and Haines instantly relaxed his grip and sank to the floor, unconscious. Outside the tent, Captain America found the other two crooks, tied back to back, and Bucky was standing over them, patting their heads. "I do hope I wasn't too rough with them, Cap," said the gallant lad. The next morning, Colonel Stevens was talking with Private Rogers. "Rogers," he said, "this morning I found 3 men tied outside my tent, with a note pinned on them reading 'Regards from Captain America and Bucky.' Now you have the tent next to mine. Did you hear anything last night?" "No, sir," answered Steve. "I was sound asleep." "Asleep?" roared the Colonel. "Captain America and Bucky mopped up 3 armed men by themselves and saved my life, and you were asleep? Oh, why can't I have some soldiers like Captain America in this army instead of you?" But Colonel Stevens didn't notice the grin on Private Rogers' face as he left to the tent. And that's it. That's the entirety of the first contribution that Stan Lee ever made to Marvel Comics. I'm impressed. I mean, considering his age at the time, it's very well put together, very well written, meticulously edited. But it is what it is. It's a short 2-page narrative, barely enough to sort of whet your appetite for the main show, which would be the comics. Of course, this was found in an issue of Captain America Comics, which had mostly Captain America stories, 3 complete stories, as well as a couple of side issues. I believe Hurricane and was it Tuck the Jungle Boy, something like that. But yeah, what I'm really interested in, the reason why I've brought this to your guys' attention, is because I want to know what you guys think. Do you see the seeds of a great man as Stan Lee would grow to become? Or is this story unremarkable? Of course, it's not as interesting as, the later stories he would write. But of course, he is writing here for what would essentially be a side gig. It's not the main event, and he doesn't have the creative reins here. He is definitely forced into writing a Captain America story. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I love Captain America stories, but yeah, later on, of course, he would go wild with his imagination and he would fight for such titles as the Fantastic Four and Spider Man. Truly ground-breaking characters and titles that would go on to pave new ground for future comics. But tell me, guys, what do you think about this story? Is it sensational, or is it just run of the mill? Is it just mid, as they say these days? Let me know in the comments. But in all likelihood, um, I would say yeah. I would say that this is great. I would say that I love it as the first story that Stan Lee wrote, and I would honor the man by bringing it to you here now. But that's just my opinion. I would like to hear from you guys, so let me know. But until next time, nerds, stay heroic.